7 o'clock. Good evening. It is 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the public hearing of the Stratford Inland Wetlands Commission to order. Item 2021-13, 20-lot residential subdivision and associated infrastructure, Broadbridge Avenue, generally bounded by Broadbridge Avenue, Ronald Road, and Teakwood Drive. Assessors map 20.1, lot 1. Applicant Teakwood Estates. Is the applicant or his representative here? And again,
Chairman, Commissioners, good to be before you here tonight. Chris Russo with Russo and Rizzio LLC, offices at 10 Sasco Hill Road in Fairfield, here on behalf of Teakwood Estates LLC for a 20-lot residential subdivision. We've submitted our mailings, just housekeeping before. I believe, Kelly, you have a copy of our mailings, so our mailings are in order to notices for the neighbors. So this site on Broadbridge Avenue, and I'm here tonight with Greg Podlusky, who's our engineer, and William Kenny, who is our soil scientist and will speak on the wetlands. But just as a brief introduction before we get to their presentation, we're here on a lot that is on Broadbridge Ave. It's a little over 11 acres. This is the entire site that you can see here. On its western side, see here's Broadbridge Avenue. On its western side, it is bordered by a very large property that actually goes the same length as our property that's owned by United Illuminating. There's one lot that's here that runs all the way up the entire length, and then there's actually a second lot that's also owned by UI that borders this site in its entirety on that side. Provides about a 200-foot buffer. There's no development on it. It's a 200-foot buffer to the residential neighborhood next to it. The site has a number of street frontages. There's right down here, Broadbridge Avenue, but we also have Ronald's Road here, where there's a proposed extension to access a series of lots, and then also Teakwood Drive, which is proposed to be extended as well to access these lots here at the top of the site. These proposed lots are to contain single-family dwellings, but one thing I wanted to state, on the top off the bat, before we get into the engineer and his design and Bill Kenny, is that many of these lots that are proposed, which are fully compliant under the regulations, are outside the 100-foot upland area. So just to point those out, lots 1 through 7, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are completely outside the 100-foot. Lot 8, which you see right here, is essentially almost completely outside of it. There is a small corner of it here that it crosses. It's an area where we couldn't build anyway, but right here there is an area where it barely crosses. The other lots are lots 11, which is right here. Lot 11 is completely outside the 100-foot, and then also lot 17, which you see here. So that's 9 out of the 10, or 9 out of the 20 lots are completely outside the 100-foot upland. And lot 8 basically is, so that would be 10. So about half of the lots that we're proposing tonight are basically outside the 100-foot. Furthermore, on lot 10, and I can switch to the plan that shows the houses. Second. here, here's lot 10, so here's lot 11 that's completely outside, there's teakwood. Lot 11, completely outside the 100-foot. The house we're proposing here is also completely outside the 100-foot. And then 16 and 18. 16 is located right here. You can see it here. Here's the 100-foot. Here's the house. And then lot 18, which is down, it's the closest one to Broadbridge. That is also outside the 100-foot. You know, we obviously have some drainage systems, and there's things that the engineer will get into, but I just wanted to make that point, you know, because it reads as a 20-lot subdivision, which is correct, that is what it is. But there are a significant number of lots that are actually outside the 100-foot upland, and then there's also houses that are being proposed that will be outside of the 100-foot upland. The other thing I'll just note too is the Teakwood Drive extension, which is, yeah, we can see it here. That's also outside, that's completely outside. And most of the Ronald Road extension is also outside. You can see there's a purple line here, and the purple line here, which marks the 100-foot. And it's mostly, there's this portion here that's within the 100-foot. And our engineer will get into the easements and the open space, but you can see there's a conservation easement that we're proposing here as a buffer between Ronald Road and the open space. So I just wanted to highlight those areas, just kind of set the table before getting into all the engineering and all that's proposed, that there, despite being a 20-lot subdivision, there's actually a significant portion of this project development that is outside of the upland review area. So with that, I'll turn it over to our engineer to walk through what we're proposing.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Gregory H. Podleski. I'm a licensed professional engineer, land surveyor, and certified floodplain manager. But on this project, I'm only acting as an engineer. And I'm just going to go through the sheets. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions. As Attorney Russo mentioned, this is a 20-lot subdivision. There are two wetlands areas on the property, one over here closer to Broadbridge, which extends over onto the United Illuminating property, and then there's the other one that's more or less between Ronald and Teakwood. That's through here, and that also extends through to the United Illuminating property. We've created a large open space area that's going to be dedicated to the town of Stratford. We also provided a number of conservation easements, and they're all color-coded. They actually show up a little bit better on the map that's called the index map. The red indicates the open space. The green indicates conservation easements to be granted to the city. That provides an additional degree of control to the town against encroachment by future owners. The blue indicates drainage easements, and the magenta indicates sanitary sewer easements. And we have a match line through here, and for all the plans going forward that are on a 30 scale, so they're easy to read. The southerly drawings are on this side, and the northerly drawings are on that side. They're all indexed the same, so they all overlap each other to assist in doing the reviews. This is just the basic site plan that just shows the most basic elements. It shows the houses, the driveways, throughout. We chose, in doing our calculations, we chose an 1,800 square foot footprint, which is about as large as is practically going to be made there. We did that for the purposes of making sure that the storm drainage calculations were representative of what may be built. if somebody wants to build a house a little bit smaller, there's not gonna be any impact on the stormwater mitigation. It's actually going to improve it. Similarly, all the driveways, we made, double wide driveways for the same purposes. We also included 400 square feet for miscellaneous impervious areas. Nobody knows who's gonna build any of these houses, when they're gonna be built, if they're gonna be spec houses or design-build houses or whatever. So so that I could feel most comfortable as an engineer that this accurately represents the maximum intensity of development, I went and took those most impervious cases in all of this. And then you can see the large wetlands area through here. Through here. We also have the wetlands area that runs through here. And similarly, we did the same thing with all of the houses. Applied the same standards to all of the houses, whether they're within the regulated area, whether a portion of the properties are within the regulated area, or if they're totally in the upland area. We also went and staff requested that we provide a split rail fence to define the limits of the conservation easements. And we did that here in the green, on the sheet, SFS and SFN. And as a matter of fact, staff had a number of comments through this process, and we did everything in our ability to reach out and to accommodate all of their concerns. And some of them, I truly have to thank Kelly. She was very helpful. I think she helped bring out the best to make this the best design that I could come up with. And again, we showed the split rail fence going around there. And some of the conservation easements are actually rather large. We have roughly a 10,000 square foot conservation easement right here coming immediately off of Ronald Drive. It's a sensitive area. It's close to the wetlands. And there was really no viable way to put a house in there without being impactful beyond the stage that I would feel comfortable doing. So what we did was we incorporated that entirely as a conservation easement. There's some areas that are gonna have to be graded for the development of the road, but once that's done, it's done. This is just a simple plan that just shows the existing topography on the site. It's a very rolling site. It did take a lot of work to get through it. Again, this is just more informational than anything else, and the same thing with the northerly side of it. This is the sanitary sewer plan that we came up with. There's a sanitary sewer that's going to run all the way from Teakwood Road through here, through Ronald Drive, come back through here, and then discharge out to the municipal sanitary sewer in Broadbridge. One thing I want to point out is we have been in talks with this neighbor over here about getting an easement. That's only been in the verbal stages. It is not, it's not an assigned document yet. That is absolutely without question our preferred course of action, but I'll go through later to show how we can address that without his cooperation. But that's, without a doubt, that's our preferred course of action. And it would also, we feel it would be a benefit to him also, because the developers agreed to connect his basement to the system so that he could have, right now he has a pump system. He'd be able to get rid of the pump system and he'd be connected to this, and his basement would also be be able to have facilities. So I just want to make sure I don't over-represent anything to the commission. And again, on the northerly side, we're just going down through here, through easements on the property, through the easement that we believe we can obtain from this neighbor. To state the obvious, all the sanitary sewer infrastructure is going to be built in full accordance with the town of Stratford standards. This is the storm drainage system. The storm drainage lines are in the heavy blue line, dashed lines. On this, we'd be intercepting the stormwater that comes down Ronald Road. We put it through a water quality chamber, swirl chamber, that would separate out the oils, the grits before it proceeded down. That was done with consultation with Mr. Casey in the engineering department. And then we would go and discharge it through a level spreader, which is just basically a 4x4 concrete gallery system, set level with the grade, follow the contours with stone up to grade, so that that will go and dissipate all the energy out of this. And instead of having a concentrated flow that can lead to erosion, it's going to trickle down the hillside and go into a retention basin over here. It is a retention basin. It receives all waters. There is no open point of discharge. The only way the water gets out is percolating into the ground. So there's any possibility for contaminants, whether it's be solids or anything else, are going to be contained in here before they go into this larger wetlands area. Also, with storm, I guess I think that's on the page. I'll get to that in a minute. And similarly, on the northerly side, we go from Teakwood through here. Again, we have a water quality chamber to go through here, again, to a level spreader so that it can go gently down the slope into this wetlands. This wetlands, it's even more important to have the level spreader, because this is just basically, there's not a defined channel. It's basically groundwater meets the surface. And it seeps out wherever, whenever. There is no channel that the water can be channelized into. So this actually works in coordination with the natural characteristics of this wetland. Then we have the retaining wall plan that just highlights in the black dashes where the retaining walls are going to be. For the purposes of this application, we selected Versalock segmental retaining walls. They're an ideal, I believe they're an ideal application for this. First off, they require minimal preparation of the base. It could be done with a compacted gravel. You don't need to bring in a concrete footing. They're held back, and the soil actually works in conjunction with the walls to keep them in place. They're dry laid, so any groundwater behind them will weep through. They're segmental. I think they're 6x18, typical face size. So if you do get any settlement, they can adjust to that. Also, because of the nature of them, You don't have to bring in concrete trucks. You don't have to do form work. You know, they could be brought in on pallets and they're placed by laborers. So overall, they're less impactful than most other retaining wall systems. Again, this is the design. Any deviation from the design would have to be submitted and reviewed at least by staff, and if staff deemed it was significant enough, it would have to come back to the commission for a modification. But I'm not a structural designer. Some of the walls are high enough that they would require a building permit that would require a structural design, and at that time, a structural designer will be retained to certify the walls. But I've seen these type of walls go up to 40 feet high. And we've got nothing approaching that on this site. Most of the retaining walls they have one high point and then they feather in to match the grade. We have some over through there. And also back through here, which is actually going to be an additional buffer to the conservation easements that are a buffer to the wetlands. This is the grading plan. The solid lines with the box numbers indicate the proposed grades. And again, the same as before with the size of the houses, driveways, etc. I assumed pretty much maximum practical disturbance. In all likelihood, when the lots are actually built, the disturbance will be less, the grading will be less, but I want this commission to see what can happen, instead of having me going and shorting it and saying, okay, they're gonna do it like that, and then have somebody come in and say, oh, we can't do it with that, we gotta go back 10 more feet, and then have to approach this commission for a modification of the approvals. My goal is so that when they go to pull building permits on these, assuming that this is approved, that any questions that the commissions would have will have been addressed, so it'll be, for the most part, handled by staff. And again, on the northerly side, very similar. We went and showed the clearing limits. Again, maximum, the maximum limits that it would be. It very well may be less than that, but again, you know, we're trying to be as open as we can with everything. I've seen a lot of times where people go and they sneak it in as close as they can possibly think they can get away with, and then, you know, before the ink's dry on it, they're already approaching to try to say, oh, well, we can't build it within that envelope. We're trying to clearly show the envelopes that we believe we can fully develop the property. And you know, here we're leaving a large area. We're leaving this whole area, the entire, both wetlands areas are going to be, you know, fully protected from the clearing limits. And again, the northerly side. Then we get into the stormwater mitigation. Mr. Casey is concerned about downstream flooding, and I fully appreciate his concerns. He was very helpful to me in explaining what his concerns were, and his criteria was he wanted zero net increase in both total runoff and peak runoff rate for a 100-year storm to protect the downstream properties. It was quite the task to achieve that very high goal. This is my drainage report for just the 100-year storm. And we didn't really have a singular area where we could go and make a large basin that you'd typically see on something like this, or a large field of underground chambers, just because of the contours and the configuration of the lot. So what we did was we took each and every lot and analyzed it individually and created a unique stormwater detention system. I call it detention because there's always an overflow. But it's sized so that it'll handle 100% of the runoff from the impervious areas, notably the roofs and the driveways. There are catch basins in the driveways. The roof leaders go directly to them. For convenience, they were all specified as Cultec units. In the drainage report, the configuration for each lot is shown. The specifications for each lot are shown. All the standard details from the manufacturer of Cultec are included. However, we don't know whether the current developers are going to build all of these lots, or if market demands that they have to sell off some of them, whatever. Alternate systems may be used, but they would have to be, it's in the specifications, they'd have to provide equivalent storage. And it's also, any change is also subject to review and approval by the town. And that's all in the manual and on the notes on the plans. And again, each house has its own, unit. We did put in a retention basin over here because I was able to go and reduce the, quantity just by using the Cultecs, but there was a marginal increase in the peak runoff rate in the 100-year storm. So to get it down below that, that's the purpose of this retention basin. And again, I alluded to it before, but I don't know that I specifically stated it. Each and every house will be connected to municipal sanitary sewer. Yeah, it's the same thing on the northerly side. Each unit, each building on its own has a stormwater mitigation system, underground storage, which requires virtually no input from the homeowner. Has been provided to take care of 100% of the runoff from all the impervious areas on each individual lot. This is the soil erosion and sediment control. We've got the filter fabric fences with the blue lines with say FFF on it. Gravel anti-tracking mat construction entrances at each entrance, as well as when Ronald Road is extended through there. 2-foot sumps in all of the catch basins, which is town requirements. Silt sacks in all of the catch basins during construction. The DEP soil erosion and sediment control guidelines have been incorporated by reference, and all the relevant segments have been incorporated in all of the application materials. Now, it's to be noted that if let's just say these two lots were to be developed together, you know, the double row of filter fabric fence between them wouldn't be necessary, and you could just wrap around. We pretty much put the filter fabric fence to, trap any fugitive sediments, but also it's another buffer to contain development to the designated areas. And again, the same thing all over again on the northerly side. You see a lot of filter fabric fence. And again, they could, subject to approval by staff, they could, if they wanted to, they could go and possibly put in staked hay bales, some alternate, but any change from the plans would require, at the very minimum, consulting with staff for prior approval. And then, of course, if staff determined that it was of a significant change, then, of course, it would be the burden to come back to the commission and make an application for a change. This is just a plan showing where we did several test pits, both deep test pits and percolation tests to confirm that the soils would be satisfactory to accept this development. There's going to be significant grading. In many cases, it may be necessary to do specific, these were done for the overall design. We certainly couldn't go out and do test holes for each lot that may or may not be built. But certainly, it may be necessary when it comes to the actual construction of individual lots that additional tests may be necessary. But all the results of those tests are on both the profiles of the deep test holes and the percolation tests themselves. I've incorporated the Town of Stratford standard detail sheet. Some standard details of road cross sections, driveway aprons, various soil and erosion sediment controls. These are the galleries to be used for the level spreaders. This is a blow-up of what the Cultec units look like for each house. This is the water quality chamber that we specified. Again, it's more of a performance-based thing, but this meets the performance standard we require. If at a later time a developer were to decide to change it, they would absolutely, without question, have to come back to staff for review. And if staff felt it was necessary, then they would come back to the commission for further review. We're doing everything in our power to be above board and try to make sure that everything is clear and open. I went and put together a sheet showing all the various configurations, and it specifies which lots would have which configuration of the Cultec units. Staff requested cross sections each way on the retention basin, and that was provided here. These are the details of what the Versalock segmental retaining wall looks like. We provided a detail for the temporary stockpile detail. Again, we do show some stockpiles, but just for the very nature of it, those are going to change over time. To the extent possible, we're going to keep them in the upland areas. But again, we'll keep staff advised as they have to be moved with the development. The construction sequence is included in the overall report. Staff requested that we put it on the drawings so that there's no question that a contractor has the drawings but doesn't have the report. It's all on here. And we have the land disturbance notes all through here. Including stripping, stockpiling, soil erosion, sediment control. It's all spelled out. We get into one alternate sewer design that we came up with. If this part is no longer amenable to the easement, it would require a very small incursion to the very upper corner of the wetlands through here, but it will allow us to go through there. I'll go to the next slide, or the next page, to show you why we believe that that's the preferable alternative. I strongly do not like to encroach into a wetlands unless necessary, but this is a very small incursion to an upland fringe that once it was done and stabilized, it would recolonize with the wetland species. This is the second page of that alternate. This is the second sewer alternate. It's more visible on the northerly page, so I'll flip over the southerly page and go straight to that. With that, we would take Teakwood Road, we'd have to take it down to a pump station, which would then become the obligation of the town of Stratford to be pumped back up to Teakwood through there. It cannot be done on a gravity system. My mind as an engineer, the minor incursion into a small corner of the wetlands is the more reasonable approach. And I don't mean that as far as dollars and cents goes. I don't approach things that way. The overall impact on the town, I think, is much greater with this, because if you have a pump chamber, it requires maintenance, it requires service. There's always the possibility of a failure of some sort. And having a gravity system, to me, is highly preferable. Again, our goal is to come to terms with that property owner. We do have a verbal agreement, but until we have the written agreement in hand and on the land records, it's a nice option. But it's not, I don't want to represent to the commission that it's a guarantee. Your regulations require that we show one design alternate. We came up with 3. This one, we eliminated the retention basin. And again, as I said, we chose not to go with that because Mr. Casey very much wanted to see 0 net increase. And by 0, he meant 0, not 0.001%, he meant 0. And I took him very seriously on that. So we rejected this alternate. We had another alternate where we were able to come up with, I believe it was 21 lots that would have included a roadway coming in from Broadbridge, which had some advantages for the developer, in that you'd have 4 lots that'd be almost immediately available for sale, but the proximity and intrusion into the wetland setback we deem to be unacceptable. And then there was this one that gave us 21 lots, but we had 3 lots that were being built into a very steep hillside. It did give us more buffers for the wetlands, but the scar that would make in the earth to cut this out on the steep hillside, we deemed wasn't the best approach. Oh, I'm sorry, we had 4 alternates. This was another alternate, again, without the retention basin. One thing I would like to point out is right now Ronald Drive dead ends over here. I'll say it's more of an indirect concern of the commission, but I can see where it is a concern of the commission. The snow gets plowed right down to the end with whatever's in it. And then whatever is in that snow, whatever's in the rainfall, whatever else, as you can see at the end of the road, it's just it's an accumulation of whatever. Also makes it a little bit difficult for the people through here, especially if they have guests who have to park on the street. There's no turnaround. By going like this, we make a straight run through, makes it easier for the town and doing its plowing, et cetera. We also go and provide catch basins with deep sumps so that we're intercepting sediment before it gets into the wetlands. And then all of that runoff is being channeled through a water quality chamber to, again, further filter the water before it goes through the level spreader. And the level spreader is actually a final filtration. You've got about a 4 or 5 step treatment train on the stormwater that falls on this site. And I think that touches on everything I wanted to say. If the commission has any questions, I'd be happy to address them now or later in the evening.
First, can you spell your name for the secretary?
Sure. Why don't I just...
That's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Now we'll have Bill Kenny come up for his presentation.
We'll go through the
Okay.
wetlands, or soil scientist, and then open up to questions.
Good evening, I'm Bill Kenny. I'm the principal of William Kenny Associates in Fairfield. I'm a professional wetland scientist, soil scientist, and landscape architect. We were hired to assist with this project in several different ways. One was to visit the property and identify and delineate where inland wetlands or watercourses are present on the property. Then we were asked to conduct an assessment of those wetlands, the existing conditions, what their quality and flora and fauna and so forth, and then work with the design team to help to refine the design so that we could propose something to you this evening that we believe does not adversely affect the wetlands. And lastly, we put together plans, two plans. One is a wetland and buffer habitat enhancement plan, and that includes planting and invasive vegetation control and some other activities in and adjacent to the wetlands. And then we also prepared a second drawing that is a drawing that shows proposed street trees that's in compliance with zoning requirements. But we did include that with your submission. The trees that are being proposed are all native to the region. And so I'd just like to briefly review with you the existing conditions of the wetland and then talk about some of the proposed conditions and the potential for adverse impacts. This drawing focuses just on from the central portion of the property south. The northern portion of the property, there are no wetlands present on that. And the property north is to the right on this drawing. You have the utility right-of-way to the west or to the top of the drawing. You have Broadbridge Avenue to the south. That's a 4-lane road with a vegetated median between it, so it's quite a wide right-of-way for a town road. And then you have the local roads that dead end, Ronald Road and Teakwood Drive to the north of that. There are 2 inland wetlands on the property, one in the southwest corner here. Both of the wetlands are forested. They're broadleaf deciduous wetlands, very common to the region, red maple swamps, where red maple is the most common wetland tree in the area, and it's very common on these wetlands. So you have a relatively level wetland in the southwest corner, and then in the central portion of the site, you have a sloping wetland that, in its eastern portion, it's sloping, and then it levels out where it's near the western property line. Both of these wetlands extend off into the utility right-of-way that runs north to south along the western portion of the property. Off-site, there's quite a bit of disturbance to the vegetation related to the utility right-of-way, so there's a lot of sunlight. And with that sunlight comes a lot of invasive vegetation. So right up to the edge of the property, in the wetlands, there's Phragmites or common reed is very common, is the dominant plant in the wetlands as you move off-site. Property is 11 acres. So with regard to proposed improvements, a 20-lot subdivision, there is no activity proposed within the wetlands themselves. So all the activity is outside the wetlands. No homes or drives are within 50 feet of a wetland. There's 1.9 acres of open space proposed, so open space that'll be set aside as an individual lot and protected in perpetuity. That's 1.9 acres, and then there's 1.1 acres of conservation easements. So that easement area will be over private property, but those areas will be protected in perpetuity. So you have a total of 3 out of the 11 acres that are going to be set aside and protected. They primarily cover the wetlands and areas adjacent to the wetlands. On this drawing, as I mentioned, we have shown some habitat enhancement activities, and we're showing planting on the eastern edge of this wetland, adjacent and within areas where the proposed stormwater basin is going to be would be developed, and then to the east of this northern wetland, we're showing tree planting and native meadow planting to restore some areas that'll be disturbed temporarily to complete the construction of the project. Within the northern wetland, there is an abundance of invasive vines that are starting to impact the growth of the trees in that area. So we propose to go in and cut and kill those vines so that they don't smother those trees over time, because as I was mentioning with the utility right-of-way, if you have an area that opens up with a lot of sunlight, the invasive vegetation does much better in the areas of a lot of sunlight. So what we propose is to help those trees there and keep them healthy so that we can keep a lot of shade in there and help to control invasive vegetation that way. There's also some debris and trash It's more prevalent in the northern wetlands, so we propose to remove that by hand. Lastly, along the border of the conservation easement and open space areas where they border the home sites, we propose a split rail fence that would follow along that boundary to provide a very clear and significant demarcation between where the residential yard will be and where the conservation area. And there'll be signs that will be put on the posts of those split rail fence to make that clear. So with all those activities proposed, the homes, the driveways, 2 extensions of the roads, the very detailed stormwater management plan that Greg described to you, as well as his soil erosion and sediment control plan. We then looked at the potential for impacts, and we typically look at what we call direct impacts, which are activities within a wetland, and then we look at indirect impacts. So that would be what of the proposed development that's occurring outside the wetland, how that might impact the wetland. And with a development like this, it really comes down to water management, both during and after construction. So as water moves from the upland area to the wetland, is it carrying something that could hurt the wetland? So during construction, is it carrying eroded soil, sediment that ends up in a wetland and hurts it? Or after construction, is it carrying something that washes off of some driveway or a roof and makes its way to a wetland and impacts it? So since there's no activities within the wetland, there's no direct impacts. And with the proposed soil erosion and sediment control plan, which Greg has designed in great detail, and he's designed in accordance with the state soil erosion and sediment control guideline that's published by the Connecticut Deep, and with his stormwater management plan, which he has designed in accordance with state guidelines for the Connecticut Deep Stormwater Quality Manual from 2004. The project will control that water that runs off the property. It's going to hold it back. It's going to clean it and treat it so that that water will not adversely affect the wetlands that border the proposed improvements. So with those mitigation measures for stormwater runoff, and with the proposed enhancement activities, the 3 acres of open space and conservation easement, and the planting and invasive species management, the native plantings, and the control of invasive vegetation, it's my professional opinion that the project will not adversely affect inland wetlands or watercourses on the property or off the property. Be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. All done?
Yes, Chair, I was gonna review the criteria for decision, but maybe I should hold off on that until after answering
So,
questions
what's that?
for the experts.
First, Kelly, you got anything?
I think I already submitted this to you. I was just looking for some more information on the Versalock retaining walls, particularly where you have a level spreader proposed right at the base of an 8-foot retaining wall, but I know that you mentioned that you'll have a structural engineer review that as well.
Well, the area where for the record, Greg Podleski, the area where the retaining wall is in proximity to the level spread of the retaining wall is only 2 to 3 feet high, and it does have a gravel bed behind it, so the water will filter through it without putting an unnecessary strain on the wall. But again, we could certainly have the structural engineer who will be doing the design review that. We actually do have the potential to eliminate the wall through there, but I think the wall is preferable there, but there are ways to modify it to eliminate that wall. I think the way that we did it gives us the best balance of giving us the full level spreader and maintaining it. Actually, the retention basin is probably a little oversized, because I'd much rather make it oversized, so if it fills up with debris and sediment, it's still going to have the net design capacity.
Okay, if you could provide that structural engineer's analysis, I would appreciate that.
Yeah,
All
well,
right.
that would that would be, I think the ideal way to do that would be, if you were to grant an approval, make that a condition of approval that a structural design must be submitted to staff for review prior to construction of any retaining wall. Because until we get full permits, there's no point in actually getting a structural design for the walls that may have to change.
Okay,
That would be my suggestion. From my professional perspective, I think that would fully protect the town. And, I do want the town fully protected. It's, that's the professional thing to do.
understood.
Thank you.
That's it?
That's all I have.
All right, any questions? Mr. Kapinski?
Yes, question for Mr. Kenny, perhaps. Out of the, you got 11 acres total for the project, or the whole parcel. 3 is going to be left natural, and that leaves 8 acres. So on that 8 acres, how much is going to be impervious? Estimate. If fully developed, let's say.
Greg can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe approximately 2.7 acres. Yes.
Impervious.
Yes.
Okay.
Based on his design, and as he was saying, he's shown very large footprints to be conservative and show like a worst case, what would be generally a worst case condition.
Any other questions? Angela?
Okay, so this is a combination. My main question is about Ronald Road. So that, I noticed here when I came to town about 20-something years ago, the road has stopped. Why did they originally stop where they did? Does anybody know?
The best that I can come up with was the only way to continue the road would be to extend it onto this property. And my guess would be this property wasn't available for the extension of the road at that time.
Okay. And my other question is about the grading. How much grading are you going to bring in? I've been on both sides of that road. So again, being on the other side where it's very low down and you're looking up at the houses there, how much are you bringing in?
In total, or? In total, the net fill is approximately 8,500 cubic yards.
Which would translate to what? In like feet,
It's,
volume?
well, that's the volume. Let's see. At the end of Ronald Road, there'd be approximately 8 feet of fill over what's there now. Towards the beginning of Ronald Road, obviously, we've got to pretty much match. There's going to be virtually no fill. And then it's going to blend down through there. Once you get over here, over in this area, we're almost at grade. So, we're doing everything we can to go and fit within the existing contours.
Okay, when you say at grade, you're gonna continue at 8 feet?
No. When you get to this area over here, the road is gonna be more or less where the present soil level is. When we get back here, just because of the way that the contours go, it's gonna be almost 8 feet of fill. Because we have to maintain, somewhat of a even pitch
And then
through there.
and then the pitch is gonna slowly go down?
Yeah, you're dropping almost 10 feet from the end of the current Ronald Road to the end of the extension as we're proposing it.
Okay. And who's bringing in the grading?
That would be whoever the selected contractor was.
Okay,
And that's way too early. It's way too early in the process for that.
all right.
I'm assuming, because most towns do, I'm assuming that any approval would be conditioned on pre-disturbance meetings with all relevant departments in the town, as well as the contractor that's gonna do it, to make sure everybody's fully understanding of what needs to be done. I'm assuming that that's in your requirements. If it's not, I would recommend that it do be.
Okay, and to hold it 8 feet, what would have to be in that grading? What kind of materials?
I'm sorry?
To hold that 8 feet?
Yeah.
What kind of materials would
It
have to
would
be in
have
the
to be
grading?
clean, it would have to be clean structural fill suitable for roadway.
As in,
No-
what would be in
No
it?
organics, little or no clays, mostly sands and gravels.
Okay,
It's necessary, and if this commission didn't insist upon it, I'm certain that Mr. Casey would insist upon it.
and I guess my other questions were basically who's going to check all the chambers? Who's gonna maintain the fence? Who's gonna check the retention basin? Again, my question, kind of similar to Kelly's, the Versalock, what is that made of? What type of material? And I'm assuming you mean 6 inches by 1.5 feet
No,
for each piece?
They're
Or is it
actually,
6,
the details are actually shown.
is it 6, is that? The little box.
I'm sorry, there's just so many sheets in this. The details are shown on sheet DT6. And they're basically, from the outside, they look like concrete blocks. They look pretty much like a standard concrete block. Although the face is roughened up, so it doesn't have the sharp edges that you would see. I'm sure you've seen them
I'm sure I
at
have.
numerous locations. They're all over the place. They're prevalent. They may be the predominant retaining wall system that's been put in the last 10 years. Just because their ease of installation, minimal disturbance. Not that anybody could ever say a retaining wall is attractive, but they're about as attractive as you can get with a retaining wall. And again, they're dry stacked. There's no mortar involved. Once they get up above 3 or 4 feet, you have to put in a plastic reinforcing grid that goes into the soil that actually goes and pulls the wall back into the soil, so you don't get the tipping that you will get with concrete walls that haven't been properly installed.
Okay.
So it's a very nice system.
Okay, and I have a couple questions for Mr. Kenny.
Just to finalize that answer on the maintenance issue that you had brought up. So, because this is an approval for the entire site, this will be, when it gets recorded, will be in the title for the entire site. So when it's subdivided, each property owner will be bound by it. Even the ones actually that are, even in the upland review area. So they'll all be bound by it and have the responsibility to maintain it.
Okay. I have questions for you.
Bill?
Mhm. Okay, where's my question? Oh, invasive control plan. What are you going to do for that, or what's the plan?
We are going to focus on the vines
Mhm.
that are in the trees. And so we have notes in
Mhm.
the bottom center portion of our drawing
Mhm.
regarding the control of the vines. So there'll be a minimum of 3 years of control.
Mhm.
After that 3 years, you get the shade back in there, it's really gonna help to control the area, to get the trees healthy after those 3 years. We identify the list, the Army Corps of Engineers, there's many different lists of invasive plants out there, and the Army Corps of Engineers has a list, so we reference their list that will be plants that are found there. If they're on that list, those are the plants that'll be controlled. We state that the control activities will occur under the direction of someone like myself with expertise, like I have a wetland scientist. It doesn't have to be me, but someone who's a qualified wetland scientist. So the wetland scientist or expert will go out and identify specifically the invasive vegetation, and then we'll mark vegetation to remain, make sure it's clear to the contractor, and then control methods will include both physical and chemical. So we propose that there'll be cutting, and with the vines, you would cut them, and then very strategically and very targeted way, you just paint the herbicide on the stem of the vine, so you're not broadcasting and spraying throughout the area. You go in very carefully and paint the stem, the cut stem, so you can do it in a very careful and controlled way and have good success with that.
Okay.
So
And do you know what herbicides you're going to be using?
at this point, we recommend a glyphosate-based herbicide in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations and in accordance with, it will be done by professionals that are licensed by the state.
Okay, so you're going to make sure, somebody's going to make sure that the 27%, like you were talking, the 3 out of 11 acres, which is 27%, it's not going to spread into this? The glyphosate, somebody's going to check?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Is somebody going to check this, that it's not going to spread?
Yes, so it'll be, the professional involved will be, they'll have their license and they'll be taking responsibility for that. Yep.
Okay.
And we could, I think it would not be a problem to provide you with a report annually for those 3 years of what was done and what we found and what we did, so.
It?
Good.
Any other questions? Mr. Blake?
Good evening. I have a question about the sewer line. And I thought, if I'm correct, you said there were 2 alternatives. One would cut through a property that you're verbally negotiating now, which would touch the wetlands.
The one that, our preferred option, the one that's incorporated in our designs, relies on obtaining an easement from a neighbor. Again, we've been told verbally that he is amenable to that,
Right.
but again, we don't have a written document on that.
That line would be within the wetlands or the setback?
That would be, it would absolutely be within the regulated setback, no
Okay.
question, but it would be outside of the wetlands itself. The other alternative would be
The non-gravity
almost
system?
parallel to that, but it would cut less than 10 feet into a corner of the wetlands, being fully on the subject property.
Oh, is that the pump-up system would cut
No,
into
the
the wetlands?
pump-up system wouldn't encroach into
Would
the
not.
would not encroach into the wetlands at all. but it would create a host of other problems,
Yeah, I agree.
maybe not directly related to this commission, but absolutely directly related to the town.
So we don't know yet which, if we were to vote, we wouldn't know really.
Right, I mean,
We
that's
would be
the reason
approving
we
essentially
show
both.
what we have that option that we could go to the neighbor possibly, but because we don't have that secured, we have to show you how we can, with what the current state of
Yes,
things
of
are.
course.
What we would do. So that's what we're asking to approve, because really, an approval can't be made conditional on obtaining something from a site that's not, that we don't even have a right to right now. So, that's why we've shown both of them.
But approval tonight, and maybe the question's more for you guys,
You're not gonna approve it.
would say, yes, it's approved for either option? That's what I'm at. I mean, if it was approved, we would essentially be saying either option is approved. Yeah, we're approving your option. Does that sound reasonable, that statement? No, I'm not asking for advice on how to vote. I'm asking if there was an approval given tonight based on what was presented here, we would be saying as a commission, hey, we approve the plan for either option 1 or option 2.
I think they want you to approve their preferred option that goes through that residence yard.
Right, but they don't have an agreement
On our
to that.
portion, but just so you know, if the neighbor did agree to that, there would be work within the upland review area on his property. So we would have to come back to you for approval for the work on his property, because his property is not a part of the application.
Okay.
So if the neighbor agrees.
Correct.
You would be standing in front of us again.
Right.
with a
Yes,
new plan for the
except not for
neighbor's yard.
Broadbridge Avenue, for this piece, we'd be back before you with for his property.
And if the neighbor doesn't agree,
Then we would go with the alternative that we've
then
submitted.
you would not need to come back here for approval for that, because essentially that would be gained.
No, that was the reason we put it with
Right,
this, in
gotcha,
case
understood.
we don't get it, yeah.
Okay. And the pumping system, it will be maintained by whom?
Yeah, so that would have to be deeded over to the town and it would
Town would
become the
maintain-
responsibility of the town in perpetuity. Electric, maintenance, repairs,
Right,
et cetera,
Inspection.
et cetera, et cetera.
right. Okay.
It was just shown something that can be done. I can't wholeheartedly endorse that option, but it is a viable option.
Yeah,
I think
I understand.
I don't think it serves the interests of this commission or of anyone in the town. That was shown more as a justification why we feel that a minor incursion of approximately 10 feet into a small triangular corner of the wetlands is justified and preferable.
I understand.
Yeah.
That's what we approve, right? So I have a second separate question. The manufacturer of the detention center that each individual property owner would be responsible for was Caltech?
Cultec.
Cultec?
C-U-L-T-E.
Did we speak about that at the last meeting, that they require maintenance to their systems routinely?
Right.
Not, even if they're, so the homeowners essentially would be required to
Correct.
do
That's
required
correct.
maintenance on
And
their
the homeowner
water
would be
detention
provided
centers.
with the manufacturer's recommended maintenance.
Okay,
In reality, the way these are connected, the maintenance is more of an inspection thing, and if you have a problem, then you have to get a professional out to repair it.
right.
Because 90% of the water going into it would be roof leader drains. It's not like it's intercepting, a large yard area. It's not like it has a lot of yard drains that are gonna be picking up leaves,
Right.
debris.
But the responsibility will solely lie on the
Yes, the
homeowner.
responsibility would run with each individual
And the
homeowner.
pumping station would be on the town. Thank you. Thank you.
That it?
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, sir. Question for Attorney Rizzo. So, each lot owner will be, as you said, bound to maintain. Now, how will that be monitored or enforced? And I'm wondering if the town has any way to enforce that compliance with the maintenance of the underground.
I certainly think the town, I don't know if the town wants to speak to that, but you certainly have the ability, if somebody was in violation, to issue a violation. If any of these lot owners were in violation of this approval, the town would have that right.
Yeah, that would be pretty difficult to assess, though, because these chambers are underground, right? So we'd only know unless there was some kind of a catastrophe, I would think.
Again, for the record, Greg Podleski. This is nothing that's brand new. It's utilized through most towns that I'm aware of in this area of Connecticut. With MS4, it usually encourages individual houses to be responsible for their own runoff. And yes, to go and police it is really not feasible. No community has the resources to go and police, nor the will to do that. However, a failure would be, to the homeowner, would be catastrophic. And realistically, the first thing they would probably do is call up the town and say, what's going on here? At which point there'd be a system failure. It would typically be obvious, at which point they'd get a notice of violation and an order to repair. The type of system that's put in, the way that we've got it connected, that should be a very rare occurrence. There's very little opportunity for a homeowner to abuse the system. It's about as close as you can get to a set it and forget it. But a failure would become obvious, and the first person would become obvious to is the homeowner. And again, my experience is typically the first person they're going to call is somebody within town hall to go and complain about it, which is going to put the town on notice that there's a violation, and then it would be in the record that it's their responsibility to maintain and repair.
Anyone else? Dr. Ches.
Just curious, was there any study done looking at the impact on wildlife in this space?
Bill Kenny, for the record. We did prepare a letter dated February 2nd where we looked, submitted a wildlife inventory for you, where we evaluated the habitat and looked at the likely wildlife that you'd find on the property and what we observed. We also, as part of that, reviewed the state's natural diversity database, NDDB files, and the state has no record of any critical or listed species being found on the property in the past or near the property. And based on our evaluation, it's very common habitat, and so we have a list of potential and observed species. We have amphibians and reptiles, birds and mammals, and submitted that to you. And that's dated, it's a letter dated February 2nd. Oh, in there, we did say with the right-of-way adjacent that that could support box turtles. And so if that were the case, what is commonly done with projects like this is to using pretty much the same fencing that's used for soil erosion and sediment control, the silt fence. You put that in advance of starting your project and encircle your project area, and then qualified biologists will go through and confirm whether or not there's any turtles within that construction area, and if there are any, you remove them, put them outside the construction area so that you don't disturb them. And that's commonly recommended by the state, and I know it's been done in town with other projects.
Anything else?
I do have one more thing. For the engineer, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. My apologies.
Greg is fine if you want to use
Greg.
that.
If there was failure for the detention center, I think you said it'd be like catastrophic for the homeowner, and you'd call the town, et cetera.
Catastrophic, by that I mean, there'd be water that would be bubbling up, and there'd be a
What would
soggy
be
spot on the lawn.
What would be, or would there be, an impact to the wetlands
No.
based on okay,
No.
thank you.
And if I might take this opportunity, one thing I'd like to point out, I meant to include it, with regard to MS4, there is no directly connected impervious area associated with this, so it should be consistent with the town's MS4 plans. I did want to get that in there. Everything is designed to be contained in site. Again, no point source discharges, so that it goes a smooth transition to the natural wetlands and water courses.
Okay. That's it? Okay.
Chair, I just wanted to run through the criteria of the decision. I'll be brief, because it's mostly repetitive of what the experts have already said. But just to state it for the record, under your standards, section 10.2, standards and criteria for decision, asked to consider the environmental impact of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands or water courses. As stated by our expert, Bill Kenny, in his professional opinion, after reviewing what we have submitted, this proposed regulated activity does not adversely affect the wetlands. The second standard is with regard to feasible and prudent alternatives to the proposed regulated activity, which would cause less or no environmental impact to the wetlands or water course. And I think, Greg, for a considerable amount of time, we just went through each of the alternatives that we had here and how this one was the most prudent alternative. Also, again, this is a 20-lot subdivision that's completely compliant with the zoning regulations. So we feel it is really an appropriate use and the least intense use for the site with what is permitted by zoning. The relationship between the short-term and long-term impacts of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands and the maintenance and enhancement of long-term productivity of the wetlands. As Bill Kenny stated, again, this will not adversely impact the wetlands, and for the long term, we are proposing here 1.9 acres of open space and 1.1 acres of conservation easement. So 3 acres in an area. Remember, there's a large amount of area that's off of this plan where there's some lots that isn't even in the upland, but in this area, we have a large amount of space here protected to protect this area in the long term, in the wetlands in the long term. The second standard asks you to consider if there's irreversible or irretrievable loss of wetlands and water courses. Again, as Mr. Kenny stated, this does not adversely impact the wetlands. We have no activity in the wetlands. The next standard is with regard to the character and degree of injury to abutting or downstream properties. Mr. Podleski went through that with regard to runoff. It took a considerable amount of work to make sure that we had zero net increase for the 100-year storms, but we did achieve that by meticulously going through each lot and proposing the appropriate systems to make sure we did that and not have impact on abutting or downstream properties. The next standard, with regard to the impacts of the proposed regulated activity on wetlands or water courses outside the area for which the activity is proposed, I think Mr. Kenny covered that there's no impact on those areas. And then with regard to measures, which I believe is the final standard, measures which would mitigate the impact of any aspect of the proposed regulated activity. We went through our construction plan, our construction sequencings here on the plan to ensure that during construction, all the impacts are mitigated. And then Mr. Kenny listed a number of activities that we were proposing to protect the wetlands. We have the invasive plant control that will improve the system. We have the removal of debris and trash. There is a considerable amount of debris and trash that has been deposited on the site in the past. That is being removed to improve the current situation. We have, again, the dedicated conservation easement in open space areas, the installation of street trees, the installation of a split rail fence to properly demarcate for everyone where these sensitive areas are, sensitive wetlands areas are, and I already mentioned the soil erosion and sediment control. So for those reasons, we feel this application meets all the standards and criteria for decision, and we respectfully request approval of this application.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone else like to speak in favor of this application? All right. Opposed, I have Bruce Ross.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Bruce Ross. I live in Stratford, 500 Brinsmead, and I have relatives who live in the area around this development. So most of the discussion tonight's been around managing stormwater on the property and managing the wetlands. But there's a problem with a flood zone where there's 4 to 6 houses, existing homes in the corner of Topaz Place and Broadbridge Avenue. And they're directly downhill from this property. So the problem's not with the parcel itself, but in the local neighborhood downstream, there will be flooding that comes from incidental runoff from the property, even though there's a great plan for for stormwater runoff. This will aggravate an already pre-existing flood zone from Teakwood. It's currently partially controlled by the woodlands, but when that woodland's stripped, there'll no longer be any foliage to hold back the water. So at this point, the homes, there's about 6 homes that are in a floodland, and that's part of the Yellow Mill Creek, and that goes into Lake Success on the Sport property, the Remington property. And essentially, the homes with the greatest impact will be 30 and 50 Topaz Place, and 3750 and 3770 Broadbridge Avenue. I got some photos of some flooding that happened there a couple of years ago. In the past 3 years, there have been 4 100-year storms that have come up with 4+ inches of rainfall in a very short period of time. And that caused flooding in the neighborhood. September 2019, Hurricane Ida last summer, and 2 other unnamed storms. Now, we heard about a pumping system. That sounds like a great idea, but often during hurricanes and severe storm, the power goes out. So any system that relies on pumps will probably be without electrical power for some period. And so that's when you'll get the majority of the runoff. So I had one more question about this, and there are several options for managing the stormwater runoff. How do we know that the contractors, when they're developing the lot, will actually abide by these plans? I've seen a lot of developments where it's going from hand to hand to hand. You know, it's been sold many times before the development actually took place, and they didn't abide by, you know, all of the covenants that were required for a petition in the first place. How's that going to be enforced? So these are some of our concerns in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Second speaker. Stand by. Tyler Bunch.
Good evening, Tyler Bunch, 1661 Elm Street. Wetlands are an aggregate of the areas around them. They don't spontaneously exist. They are where water collects from the areas around them. There's a lot of very beautiful and eloquent description of the system that's going to be created to keep the 20-odd lawnmowers and 10-odd weed whackers and motorcycles and cars and everything that might have detritus flowing into the wetlands. By what I heard, 100% of the runoff is going to be collected and not go into the wetlands. Approximately 2.7 acres of impervious that will not be going through the natural processes and adding to the wetlands. There is no telling how much that is actually going to detract from the collected water in the areas where it naturally goes. And that's just the impervious. The likelihood that it's more like, I'd say 6, or we might go all the way to the 8 of the developed, that water, which would normally have flown naturally into areas, and unfortunately into the gentleman before me's friends' homes, won't be going to its natural place. Now, there might be a plan in place to make sure that water that goes into the retention basin then goes back up to the natural processes, but there's going to be loss through evaporation, through cleaning it itself. All of that acreage of rainfall will not be going where nature has put it. It will adversely affect the wetlands. Not to mention the fact that we're going to fence off an area and not disturb the wildlife by disturbing the wildlife and moving it on the other side of the fence. Okay, this is going to impact the wetlands, period. The percentage, only time will tell. Thanks.
Thank you. What's the name, Mark? Is it Marshallite?
It's Marka Lee from 1661 Elm. Hey there. First, I'd like to say I would never consider any wetlands or woods common in this very densely populated area we live in. Our wild places have been slowly disappearing due to the chipping away from bulldozing and paving and development. So no, this land is not common, quote unquote. And invasives and vines can still be eradicated without developing the land. All it takes is a plan, right? Okay. The problem here is the loss of native local biodiversity due to the eradication of natural wooded land, which is adjacent to the wetlands. This land that has been proposed for development is not really truly separate from the wetlands. By that I mean the wetlands would be severely negatively impacted, not only by the aggressive and noisy digging and building, but also by the very presence of human activity and the eventuality of humans living nearby. The build, which inevitably would use loud machinery and cause harsh shaking, would frighten animals both in and near the wetlands, disrupting their natural behaviors like breeding and nesting. Wildlife would be scattered and fragmented by these proposed structures. Bright outdoor lighting would confuse nocturnal pollinators and migrating birds who use the moon as a guide. That's been proven by science. The sounds of human-caused noise and vehicles in a place that they used to call their home would drive these animals away to wander into the yards of nearby residents or into traffic to perish. Please don't allow that to happen. Uncommon native plants, such as wild sarsaparilla, which I have personally witnessed growing there, need specific soil conditions that these woods and wetlands provide. Scientists are only just learning the complexity of biodiversity between soil and fungi and mammals and birds and aquatic and semi-aquatic life, like amphibians, turtles, box turtles, yes, that are endangered. One wrong decision, like building these structures, could have a literal butterfly effect on the local species around it, perhaps losing some altogether. While it may seem preposterous that losing just one species can have such a dramatic effect, I'd like you to consider the ongoing chronicles of the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park, which are bringing back balance after they were eradicated in the 1930s. I sent a link to a few of the members that I'm hoping you'll share. Quote, "It is like kicking a pebble down a mountain slope where conditions were just right that one falling pebble could trigger an avalanche of change. What we're finding is that ecosystems are incredibly complex," unquote. Changing the nearby land will most certainly alter the landscape, which will affect the nearby wetlands. Building here would mean chopping down trees. It means a loss of leaf canopy and shade that currently protects the integrity of the wetlands. Tearing out those trees, aside from destroying homes of predatory birds like owls and hawks, which are also not common, would open the wetland wilderness to the hot sun and having a drying effect. Creatures like endangered box turtles, salamanders, frogs, pollinating insects, such as the endangered monarch, who depend on wetlands like this for one natural behavior called puddling. They would be adversely affected. Pesticides, which are typically used near developments like this, would have a devastating effect on monarchs and countless biodiversity. Wildlife is under constant threat from developments like this one, because even if only built nearby, it still changes their habitat. I personally have walked in this place of wildlife and nature. It needs to be saved and preserved. Please do not allow a development to happen here. Please be the protectors of this land, the wetlands nearby, the animals, the trees, the plants, and all of these wild creatures around the wetlands and on the wetlands. I highly suggest creating a land trust for this pristine place and preserve the wilderness for what it is, nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Veronica? Schwab?
Good evening, council. Good evening, residents of Stratford. My husband and I purchased 55 Den Road, which is immediately adjacent to the proposed construction, on July 1st, with the promise of a quiet and serene dead-end street for my child and my future child to roam free and safely. All those people behind me are my neighbors who currently keep my child safe. With this new construction, not only will I have to now think about new strangers coming into the neighborhood, now I have to worry about the potential of harmful chemicals that my newborn and my 5-year-old will be essentially ingesting. Also, we bought this house in a very volatile real estate market. We paid well over market value for our house. So I would like to know how we will be compensated for all of our diminished value of our properties. After an hour of an invigorating presentation, none of us have yet to hear the benefits of this new construction. I really hope all of you will think about the effects not only this will have on our environment, our wildlife, us as human beings, because while you all want to line your pockets, the rest of us just want to live in a peaceful and orderly society.
Thank you. Teresa Jackson. Teresa Jackson? Oh, there she is.
Good evening. I'm Teresa Jaxis, and I reside at 15 Glen Drive. And I am here to support keeping the woods open, keeping this space free of construction of a 20-lot home subdivision. That would destroy the natural habitats of the many species of animals that reside there. This intended project will definitely diminish that. These woods have been basically for my, let me just fix this for a second. There we go. For my 57 years have been untouched and peaceful. I grew up in this neighborhood, and I chose to raise my family in this neighborhood. The damaging effects of construction, first and foremost, is the direct habitat loss. These woods hold a diverse and robust ecosystem, as we know. And I can name all of, somebody had asked for the animals and the species. I can name it for you. There are birds, deer, turkeys, woodchucks, rabbits, mallard ducks, possums, skunks, coyotes, and monarch butterflies, which we know now, as of July, were on the extinction, on the endangered species list, excuse me, due to deforestation and pesticides. So keeping these wooded areas will help boost their numbers and hopefully keep these beautiful insects from the extinction list. And lastly, it has a direct impact on the quality of life for those of us who have chosen to live in this neighborhood and intentionally have picked these quiet, serene, dead-end streets. Our open green space is becoming scarce and soon in this town non-existent. We need to keep this space in Stratford open and not displace and destroy the wildlife. Where are they going to end up, and how come we don't care about that? So I vehemently oppose this development. I implore this commission to consider my plea for the ecosystem and the wildlife that exists there, as well as residents like myself and those of us who are here tonight who have chosen to reside and raise our families here and now feel that we too are being pushed out. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. The next speaker is Paula Sweeney.
I just sent my comments in to Ms. Garrigan, so I'm not gonna speak to me, I'll let you
Okay.
be able to read them.
I'll read them when everyone's done speaking then.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Greg Dancho.
Greg Dancho, 30 Ruby Lane. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here this evening to speak against the Teakwood Estates Development Project. Niches, habitats, ecosystems are words I use on a regular basis in my job. These fragile areas are shrinking at a very rapid rate, and that is a major cause for increasing numbers of endangered species of plants, insects, birds, reptiles, and mammals around the world. Stratford's niches, habitats, and ecosystems are under constant tremendous pressure for development. Many have already been lost, and those few that remain are being required to create more housing and create less homes for our wildlife. This project has wetlands, many trees, rock outcroppings, all create niches, habitats, and ecosystems that will be lost in this development. In addition, this property is used for by wildlife as a safe corridor to move from one area to another. Fragmenting these corridors adversely impact wildlife and cause human and animal conflicts. Neighbors tell me, I've talked to neighbors around the area, of bobcat, fox, turkey, migrating birds, insects, and other creatures that are seen there and call this area home. Home, AKA niches, habitats, and ecosystems. We in Stratford have a very limited amount of these homes now. Let's not lose another one. Thank you. P.S. The best way not to adversely impact wetlands is to not impact the area around them. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Dancho.
Good evening, Commissioners. As councilperson, this is Laura Dancho. I live at 30 Ruby Lane. As councilperson for this area, I'm here to represent our residents with regard to the issues concerning new development that would exacerbate the existing water and flooding issues of the residents in this area. Not only is the Teakwood property an important wildlife corridor connecting to Remington Woods, of which obstruction will cause declines in the amount of native wildlife who utilize the space for hunting, foraging, and refuge, as well as cause more wildlife to move into the backyards of residents. Understanding the impact of any change, not only to the wetlands, but also to the water table in this area, is of utmost importance to those residents on Topaz, Southfield, and Broadbridge Avenue whose homes are downhill from the Teakwood property and already exist in a FEMA flood zone. Google Maps of this area clearly show a watercourse commencing within the property proposed for development. This brook flows down Eastgate across Topaz and to Broadbridge Avenue. The brook then flows under Broadbridge Avenue behind Deerfield condos, eventually leading into Lake Success and Remington Woods. Any disturbance to this natural water flow will take immense engineering, of which no human control methods have worked in the past. Residents on Broadbridge Avenue, specifically 3770 Broadbridge, 3750 Broadbridge, 30 Topaz, and 50 Topaz, must be removed from their homes during storms, as the flooding requires that the utilities be turned off. They use sandbags against their door frames every time it rains and have already lost much of their personal belongings due to chronic flooding. I don't know what to say any longer. This is my second time in front of water inland wetlands for development into natural spaces in District 10 that affects water flooding and the health and well-being of a wetland. This is an area that has water tributaries and will affect residents downstream, is under UI wires, and is on a cliff where most yards will be severely angled. This area is clearly not suited to development of any kind, and I respectfully request that this application be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly has to read some comments then.
All right, I'm just going to read through a few public comments that were sent directly to my email. These are not the opinion of myself or the town, but of those who wrote it, and I will state their name at the beginning and the end of each statement. So this is Katarina Cunliffe, pardon me. Good morning. I wanted to write in opposition to Teakwood Estates building 22 single-family homes. Building such a large number of homes will increase the flooding that's already occurring and destroy the little green space we have. It will also destroy habitat for the local wildlife. Our sewer systems and infrastructure was not built to handle an ever-increasing number in population. If granting any homes to be built, the numbers should be much lower to preserve our environment and not increase flooding. Again, that was Katarina Cunliffe. I have a comment from Bruce Ross, but you already spoke. Would you like me to read yours?
Can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
And they show the flooding during Hurricane Ida.
Okay.
Okay, should I pass this around?
Yeah.
So everyone can see?
Sure, if you'd like. Would you like me to read the email that you sent as well, or no?
I summarized that, but you can.
You would like me to?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will read that.
That's the flooding.
All right, this is from Bruce Ross at 500 Brinsmaid. I recently posted this description on the neighborhood chat board, nextdoor.com. It relates to the planned residential development of Teakwood. Largely, this area is an upland review area and also contains wetlands, so the area should not be developed as densely as proposed, 22 single-family residents, in the application. Perhaps by including treed green spaces, it could support 6 homes if runoff were properly controlled. The problem is not with the parcel itself, but with other local neighbors downstream on Topaz Place and Broadbridge Avenue who will be affected by flooding due to uncontrolled runoff. This will aggravate an already pre-existing flood zone in that area because the runoff from Teakwood, that is partially controlled by the woodlands, will no longer be controlled once the majority of the foliage is removed and replaced with hard surfaces. Here's my original post. The problem with this property is that it's an upland review area for the creek that drains down into the wetlands behind half a dozen homes on Broadbridge Ave that will now be made a flood zone. Once developed, the rainwater from Teakwood property will run right off the paved sidewalks, patios, driveways, roofs, and lawns, and will flood down the hill and swamp the yards and basements on Broadbridge following a typical 2-inch rainstorm. If, however, the property remains wooded, the rainwater instead will slowly seep into the leaf-covered understory. This will be a disaster if developed. So if the development were to proceed as planned, then the homeowner's only recourse would be to take civil action against the developers or the eventual home purchasers if flooding were to worsen. With best regards, Bruce Ross. You're welcome. I have 2 more. This is from Grace Arpey at 34 Chelsea Street. To the Inland Wetlands Commission of the Town of Stratford. I oppose the proposed 20-lot subdivision development before this commission, known as Teakwood Estates. I viewed the application for this proposal multiple times, and many questions remain regarding grading and drainage as they relate not only to the wetlands on the property, but the nearby residences. Nearby residents are rightfully concerned about flooding and draining issues should this project move forward. At this time, this area is also wooded and serves as an important link to nearby Remington Woods for our non-human neighbors and residents, our wildlife. Changes and disturbances to the on-site wetlands will quickly have a negative effect on the nearby marsh, which multiple basins on the property currently drain into. The topography of this property has appeared to present multiple challenges for this application, and many questions and concerns still remain regarding drainage and flooding issues that will affect surrounding properties. I respectfully request that the commission deny this application. Again, that's Grace Arpey. And then I have 1 more that just came in from Paula Sweely. Dear Mr. Fahey and the Inland Wetlands Commission, from reading the item announcing tonight's hearing attached, and attached is a screenshot of the public notice in the Connecticut Post, posted last Friday in the Connecticut Post Classified, seen by those who first of all subscribe to Connecticut Post and secondly make a habit of studying the classified section, it is not at all clear that the proposed 20-lot development presents a danger to Stratford's ever-shrinking yet extremely important wetlands. To find the agenda for tonight's Wetland Commission meeting, an individual first needs to go to the town website, locate council calendar, click on the Wetlands Commission, then click on and first download, then open and read the agenda. In order to actually see the application, an individual must go in person to the Public Works during their hours of operation 7 to 3. As regards the item about which this hearing has been called, the agenda simply states the same description as the item in the Connecticut Post Classified. In short, in this our time when the very existence of our world is being threatened by global warming, we all need to be extremely watchful stewards and protectors of our environment. In order to do that, much more public information needs to be readily available in a timely fashion and in terms that those of us not skilled in interpreting legalese can understand. The current method of informing the public, although it fulfills the letter of the law, falls far short of what is needed to enable us as citizens to understand and to be able to stand up for the ecology of our town and take a responsible role in protecting the future of our world. Making the public aware of development which threatens our ecology should not fall to the few who somehow figure out what is happening and sound the alarm, but should be an ongoing function of our town government. P.S. Sitting in the developers segment of the meeting for the public to understand when we could not see the presentation and could not hear much of it because many speakers did not talk into the microphone. Again, that was Paula Sweely, listed in District 1. And that is all I have for submitted public comment.
Thank you.
I should have been on this list. I wanted to respond. I was on the August 17th meeting that got postponed until today.
You said you emailed me?
Yeah, and it was from back, this is like at the beginning of August.
What's your name?
Arlen Perricone, and it was on the August 17th. And then we found out that the day before it was moved.
I don't have anything from an Arlene in my emails, so I do apologize. Did I return your email? Did I confirm that I had your email?
Well, we spoke in person after it.
Okay.
You're the one who told me I had to go down to Public Works, go to Sept, and I actually went and made all these copies and distributed it to most of my neighbors.
Okay. I don't have an email from you in my inbox. Did you want to speak right now, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Hi, my name is Arlene Perricone, and I live at 40 Ridgefield Drive. I've been a resident of Stratford for about 24 years. I propose the following questions to this commission, not looking for answers, but something to think about while you're considering on your vote. I purchased my home, and I was told there was no building behind my home, which is the backside of this project developing on Teakwood, because of the wetlands and UI, and there were required setbacks from high-voltage power lines, and they are very large. So I'm surprised to hear that there's now a 20-home subdivision application being proposed. I want us to talk about an impact to the neighborhood, to traffic, to safety. Is it 20 homes, or were some donated back to help with the conservation easements? It was very confusing from the map. I could see that there were all these lots, and it looks like parts of 9, 12, 13, 14, 19, and 20 were actually cut out and had to be donated back to try to get some kind of square footage here for the easements. It's very hilly terrain back there, so flooding is a high probability, and there has been extreme flooding in that area, and as you've heard from many of the people who've been talking. You really should walk through this property. If you saw Ronald, you would never think that's a main access for a road. Most of the 2 homes that are there, and I've spoken to the people, they're gonna lose half the front of their yard so that you can extend this street to actually make an entrance for the back end of Teakwood. Teakwood is not that large, and notification only went to the first 2 homeowners. So you're saying there's 4 houses that are in Teakwood, but because of some rules, house number 3 and 4 on each side didn't even get notice. They didn't even know that this home division was happening until me and my neighbors went around with posters and was distributing it. So it was kind of deceptive to say that you're gonna be impacted, the woman who's right there, but 3 houses down, you're not gonna be impacted. How? That same traffic is going to go right past their homes. Impact to schools. I mean, have we talked about, obviously I live in the area, so I know this is a Second Hill Lane flood banal. A cost-benefit analysis, proposed tax revenue on a cost of attendance. I used to volunteer a lot in the towns and Board of Ed. It's about $9,000 to educate a child. How much revenue are we going to actually generate from these properties to offset potential education cost? Cost to build these homes. My husband's in the contracting field, and all he talks about is high raising cost of material. It's 30, 50, 40% higher. How is that inflation going to help the selling prices of these homes? Is there a market for them? Is this project going to actually be able to sell? What are those proposed selling prices, and how will that impact the other homes in the area? None of this has been told to us or given to us as facts and information so we can make good informed decision. Will owners be told that their maximum, this is based on tonight, square footage is 1,800 square foot? That's not a very big home, and it sounds like there's going to be limitations to make your home any bigger at any other time. Blueprint on the environment. Is there any ability to do solar? I mean, we're talking about putting 20 new homes, and now we've got more emissions into the environment. What's the impact going to be like that on our environment? Just not only the wetlands, but just to the air and the oxygen in the area. Is there ability to do anything so that we can reduce those carbon? Road access. Anybody who knows Broadbridge knows it's a disaster. It is not a 4-lane road. For about a half a mile from Marina Drive to Emerald, it's got 4 lanes, and that was an Army Engineering redesign. It's a disaster, because right at Emerald, the left lane becomes a left-hand turn only. I can't even turn up my street to go to Emerald. I've got to go down to the next street most of the time because I'm honked at, accidents, people are riding on my bumper, they're cursing me. Can you imagine all these new cars now coming out onto Emerald? And how are they going to do that? It is about 500 feet from a traffic light and about 500 feet from when you're going to lose the left lane. And that's what you're going to have to merge onto and keep traffic moving. That is a heavily traveled, congested road in the morning between schools and churches and people going to work and just transportation back and forth. I do not think that Broadbridge is going to be able to support another access point coming out, and I see that as a potential safety hazard where they have it designed. The T-combs, I said that, application, wildlife displacement. I noticed that it was very vague. Oh, we filed a letter on February 2nd. Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of wildlife, and as many people have indicated, and I have them in my backyard as well, there are deer, raccoons, fox, coyotes, turkeys, skunks, mountain lions, I've got 2 of them, rabbits, birds, turtles. Where are all these wildlife going to go? And, has that been talked about? I was very concerned about, and you raised a great question. So we're going to have a herbicide professional come in, but does he understand topography? So yeah, he knows his chemicals and what it can treat and kill, but does he understand the cliff and drainage of property, and when he applies that germicide to kill the vegetation that they don't want, will it not contaminate those wetlands? I think that's something we need to ensure. Cost to maintain these pumping stations in perpetuity. You raised a great point. So the liability is on each homeowner to be responsible for their own runoff, but then there's a contradiction, because I heard it's a set and forget. So then why is there required maintenance? And who is going to be liable for that required maintenance? And, based on this hilly terrain, this project will not survive without proper drainage. It is extremely hilly. It is not conducive to 20 new homes on top of what it already has. So if these drainage systems that they have designed fail in any way, I can see it as a catastrophe. I strongly recommend that this committee actually walk the property, if you haven't already, and look at Ronald, look at Teakwood, and look at Broadbridge, and you will see it is not conducive to a 20-home development.
Excuse me, could you spell your name for me, please?
Perricone, Perricone.
And you live where?
40 Ridgefield Drive, Stratford.
Ridgefield?
Ridgefield, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Okay, so,
First time we come to town hall, so we don't know about having to give a name in advance if we want to speak, but we're actually the residents that live at 30 Ronald Road where they're asking for an easement, and we'd like to clarify that discussion that we made.
30 Ronald Road, he wants to talk.
You want to talk? Oh, so you want to talk? Why didn't you sign up? Oh, really? Why didn't you sign up?
We didn't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry, yeah.
That's-
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. My name is William Rodriguez for the record, and my wife has owned that home since it was first built there. And her children grew up there and went to the school locally, so she's been there for quite some time. Yes, we did have discussions with the owner of the property. Well, I think that he represented himself as the owner. And yes, we did discuss verbally options. And our last request was actually, can you give us a proposal in writing, right? In other words, have your lawyer send us something we can then review and decide what was best for us. And that never came. And instead, what we found out over time was that these hearings would happen, right? And we're here. Now, Ronald Road, you may be familiar with it, has a very large drop, all right? And typically, you may hear us calling you because a lot of times when they come to plow the driveway, they don't go right through the end of the street. They stop right when it opens up to our, the garage space there. And they don't push it out because they don't think it's the road, but it actually is the road as we found out. That is a fairly good drop. In fact, if you want to get exercise, you can run up that hill a couple of times and you'll get it, all right? My question is, right, we have a retaining wall in the front of our house, right? And they're talking about filling the road, right, and changing the grade, right, to help with the flow of the water. How does this happen, or what happens to our driveway? And yes, that is our turnaround, by the way, so that it does impact us. So we're curious to know what's going to happen there. Does it come down and it goes level all the way back? And we're right adjacent to the wetlands, and there is a 4-foot drop there, maybe more, 5-foot drop. So that is not level. That would have to be filled, or something's going to happen there. I did notice in the map today, somebody was kind enough to drop in our box, that lot number 12 parcel is actually landlocked, okay? Meaning that there's property in front of it they're building, there's us on the other side, there's a conservation lot to the left of it, and then there's, I don't know, the gentleman's there in the yellow house to the right. So they decided to just put a lot there in the middle of nowhere, right? And then what we were approached with was, would you like to give us an easement to run pipes or the sewage underneath our property? Now we're in a 100 by 100-foot lot, not a lot of property there, right? Which means this is highly disruptive to our living, right? And yes, we may be past a pandemic, but that's a lot of traffic of people coming in and out of there, considering we're landlocked. There's wetlands there, right? So you're not disturbing the wetlands, and we're the only access in and out of there if we give the easement, right? So what happens to us? Not to mention that the front of our property is going to change when you expand that road. We have a retaining wall there. We have to consider what's going to happen to that. So the offer to put a pipe in so that we don't have to pump the sewage up and the gravity flows out, well, that's nice, but that's a lot of work and a lot of risk that we would incur. Now, I might sound a little bit selfish, but I do see the deer come to the back of the house. I see all that. The concern I have is that I think the project's a little extreme. Maybe, as somebody suggested here, scale back a little bit, right? So that you're not being so impactful. Let's not kid ourselves here. We have seen over the course of when this was first rumored around that was happening, of trees disappearing on the back side of there. How do we know? Because we can see our neighbors now we couldn't see before. So the trees are disappearing back there overnight, and we hear it, okay? This is probably not the best way to run a project. I'm a software engineer, I work for Pitney Bowes, been in this business for decades, 40 years. I've worked for the Department of Defense. I've run a lot of projects. I wouldn't say this is the best project. Perhaps, maybe table it for a bit, go examine other options. I'm sure there's plenty. I'm sure if they called us in for a meaningful discussion, we'd be happy to have it, as well as these other people here, and we could come to an agreement. But I feel a little bit bamboozled here, because that first discussion was not as thoughtful, was somewhat disingenuous for me I'm not saying it was, but it felt that way when it's presented to me, and now I'm here having this conversation. So to the committee here, the commissioner, I'll say, please, take that into consideration. Perhaps there's another venue here where we can have more dialogue and maybe approach this a little differently, and everybody can come out ahead, right, and not feel like somehow, right, this is kind of being shoved down our throats here. All right? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. How come you didn't sign up?
I'm new to this also. I've been living in Stratford for 35 years. My name is Sue Neely. I live at 420 Second Hill Lane. So I understand everyone was very eloquent about the wetlands. I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to talk about the traffic.
Let me cut you off right there.
Right.
This is the inland wetlands.
Okay. So I'm going to go
We
back
only
to
care
the
about
wetlands.
inland
Okay.
wetlands. If you could tie the traffic into
I
some
will.
effect of the
I
wetlands,
will.
we're interested in
I will,
it.
definitely.
Okay.
So what's going to happen is all of these animals that are in the wetlands are going to go onto Broadbridge Avenue, where there's so much traffic. And every morning when I go on Broadbridge Avenue, there are dead animals there because someone's doing something in the woods there behind our houses. I don't know who's doing it or who's cutting the trees down, but something's getting cut down. And all of the animals are coming out of the woods. They're in my yard, which is great, I love it, but now they're all on Broadbridge Avenue. And they're not making it across Broadbridge Avenue. They're trying to get across to Remington Arms, to that, to the wetlands there, and they're not making it. So I think we're doing them a big injustice. We really are, because the traffic is bad and we're killing the animals. We really are. It's awful. It's awful. We really need to think about this. There's not a lot of wetlands left in Stratford. There's a little. We need to keep them. We really do. Really, please think about it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So that's gonna be, I'd like to have a motion to table this.
He's asking for a rebuttal.
Want to rebut? Okay.
Absolutely. Just, Chair, because I have the experts here, you know, and there were some questions that, or some comments raised. Again, Chris Russo with Russo and Rizzio for the record on behalf of the applicant. Just in a response to a few things, Commissioner, that's exactly why we put both options for the sewer on there, because there is a third party that's not a part of the application. So that's why we included both options on there to be before you for approval. So in case an agreement wasn't able to be reached with that third party, we have this other alternative, which we believe is a feasible alternative. You know, this is private property and it has a right to development. Intensity of use is kind of a matter of perspective, because as a land use attorney, when I see a large amount of land in a residential area, I know that there's possibilities for, under state statute, for a lot more intense developments than this. And this project, again, is a project, there's no variances on this project. It is completely conforming to the regulations, just as the other houses, the other, where some of these neighbors live, comply with the regulations probably, so do these lots. And on top of that, our client has proposed conservation easements and open space to the tune of 3 acres. And you can see this woodland that's here to remain. This lot, as Mr. McCluskey said, it could have been a lot. He looked at it, he didn't feel comfortable with it, so we designated it as an area for conservation easement. And then all this open space, all this area over here to the right is completely out of the upland review area. So I feel a client has proceeded with a very responsible development in this area. And one of the beauties of having a wetlands approval for this property, for this larger property, is again, and I know some commissioners that were commenting to this effect, this is an approval that will run with this property. It doesn't matter how many times it's transferred. These property owners will be bound by this approval, and if they don't follow the approval, they'll be in violation. And so, if anything, it is protecting these 11 acres for the future, and that making sure that if the engineering and everything is, in our testimony from the wetland scientists, if everybody's comfortable on its impact of the wetland, that it doesn't have any impact on the wetlands, that by approving this, it is in place in perpetuity on this property to make sure these wetlands are protected. The same thing with the construction sequencing and the development. That's all here on those plans. Whoever develops this property has to follow that construction sequencing. They have to have a site monitor on during the construction of all these lots to make sure that everything is done in accordance with the approval, to make sure everything is done right, which is way beyond a lot of other properties have for development. So that's one of the beauties of getting this property under a wetlands approval for this development. There were some specific questions regarding runoff, and I think some of the habitat that I'd like Mr. Podluski just to kind of restate to make clear, because I know that was a concern, one of the main concerns of the neighbors.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Again, for the record, Greg Podluski. One point that I'd like to make very clear was I've been in conversations with Mr. Casey about the drainage on this on numerous occasions. He made it very clear to me of his concerns regarding the downstream flooding. Just for the record, I am a certified floodplains manager, which means that I am professionally very concerned about flooding. And to address Mr. Casey's concerns, again, we designed this for a 100-year flood, 100-year storm, which is a very high threshold. And we set it so that there's a reduction in total runoff and approximately a 20% reduction in peak runoff rate from the site. And when it comes to riverine flooding, it's the peak runoff rate, not the total volume, that's controlling. So we took care of that. Again, Mr. Casey is rightfully and understandably very concerned about the downstream flooding, and we did everything we could to go and address those concerns. I heard one of the speakers say that he was concerned that there wasn't enough water going into the wetlands as a result of this. I don't know whether he misunderstood what I said. The point I was making was we were having no net increase. There's still runoff. There's approximately 3 inches of runoff over the entire site in a 100-year storm after development. The water that gets retained on site is held in either underground storage or the retention basin, so there's full groundwater recharge. And as you know, wetlands or watercourses are where the surface water elevation meets the groundwater elevation. So by putting in the groundwater recharge, by recharging the groundwater, we continue to feed the wetlands areas long after the storm has passed. So you don't get that surge that you would get with a detention basin where it comes in rapidly, fills up, drops down. 2 days later, everything's bone dry. Here, everything is going into the ground, so you do get the groundwater recharge, which will help nourish the wetlands. Another point I'd like to make, that's a significant report. In that report, each individual property is analyzed so that if in the future some developer, some builder wants to come in and wants to deviate from the plan for that particular lot, they can go and bring in the revised stormwater calculations that would have to meet the characteristics of what we have. Once they met the characteristics for that lot, it would not change at all the characteristics of the overall development. That was done intentionally on my part so that, we aren't relying on one lot over here to do everything for 3 lots. They changed something, now everything's changed and the whole property has to be reanalyzed. It was done so it could be analyzed. I understand Mr. Rodriguez is concerned. I know that he did speak with Mr. Giacobbe, who's one of the partners. Unfortunately, he's out sick with COVID today. We certainly have absolutely no right, and he has no obligation to provide an easement, which I made clear in my earlier presentations. But just for the record, a few months ago, I did speak to Mr. Rodriguez. At least I believe it to be him. It was a phone call only, and he represented himself as that, and I discussed what we were doing through there, including the sanitary sewer going through, including providing for his basement service, and I described how we would be extending Ronald Road. At that time, he was very happy because the snow plows have a tendency to leave big piles of snow right at his driveway. And just also, Mr. Casey asked us to go and commit to rebuilding Ronald Road all the way out, and we did agree to do that as well. Again, I'm just representing my discussions with Mr. Rodriguez just to show that we have been clear, we've been above board. He is certainly entitled to do whatever he wants to with his property. He has no obligation to us, but I just want to make sure that the commission knows that there was clear communication on that. Thank you.
And Chair, just. Wait.
Whoa. Let him speak, please.
I don't know who's spoke. I don't know his name. The gentleman who just spoke, I just wanted to know his name. He's saying I spoke with him, but I don't recall him speaking at the time.
It's Greg Pidlowski is our engineer. In just, in summation, Chair, a couple of other things that were just mentioned. One, the notices were sent out in accordance with your regulations. And 2, there has been no activity conducted by my client on the property. I don't know what people are referencing, but there has been trespassers who have been on the property and dumped trash on it. And one of the things in this, in Bill Kenny's report calls for removing that. But from our client, no. So just to state that on the record. So, Chair, I guess, are you going to table the application, leave the public hearing open? Or?
What we're going to do is, we're going to continue the public hearing.
Okay.
And then we're going to close tonight's public hearing to be continued.
Okay, Chairman, in that case, I would just reserve the right, or respectfully request to reserve the right to respond to any new comments that were submitted or anything like that, and to sum the application up at the next.
Of course.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, we're going to continue this public hearing, and we're going to close tonight's public hearing right now. Motion to table?
Second.
Second? All in favor? Okay. All right. Now, going to call order a special meeting. First item of business, approval of minutes of August 17th, 2022 regular meeting. Has anyone had a chance to read them? Any corrections, additions, deletions? Yes.
The next public hearing is going to be the 3rd Wednesday of October at 7 p.m. again. But it'll be posted in the Connecticut Post in accordance with our regulations, and it'll also, the agenda will be posted on our website and out in front of the town clerk's office.
And then if we want to speak again, we should contact you.
Or you can sign up the night of as well. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Take it outside, please. You can stay, but you can't talk. So, you have approved, I can't hear you, take the mask off. So, motion to approve, second? All in favor? Okay. Old business, 20-lot residential subdivision. We're going to leave it on the table. Oh, no, wait a second, wait a second. On this 20-lot residential subdivision, Kelly has suggested, and I think that we should hire an engineering firm to help us go through this. Now,
Can you say that again?
Kelly suggested, and I agree, that we should hire an engineering firm, an independent firm, to take a look at this, to assist us in making a determination.
I agree. Yeah.
We have a motion. We have a second?
I agree. Second it.
Okay. Dr. Chess, second. Mr. Kropinski. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I do want to note that in accordance with our regulations, I believe we need to set what that cost is going to be at this meeting, correct? I don't know if you read in the memo that we will be collecting 150% of what we believe that this third-party review will cost. For reference, the third-party review that was done by the town of Stratford, not this commission, but by the town of Stratford, for that Peters Lane subdivision from last year, that cost about $8,000. This is a much larger application, and I would recommend that we set this at a minimum of about 10, we can estimate $10,000, so for 150%, we'll,
15.
Yeah, we'll put that at $15,000 that we would collect from the applicant to cover costs. And then, I don't know if you read further on, but anything that, that we don't use, we then would refund to the applicant. Okay.
All right, so
Do we need to motion?
we need a motion.
Make a motion, we do that?
Okay.
Well, no, so we have a motion to hire someone at a not to exceed or at a
Make a motion to hire someone?
Yes.
Right. At a not to exceed $15,000.
Correct. That's how our regulations read.
But we're not going to pay, we're not going to pay for it, the applicant's going to pay.
Remember to turn your mic off if you're not talking. Only so many can be on at once.
Right. Right. So, we have a motion?
Yeah.
Second. A motion by,
I think he made the motion.
Wade,
Wade.
second by Mr. Right, okay, so, and all in favor of that motion?
Can we,
All in favor?
Aye.
aye, but just a question. In terms of the findings, and one of the things that's, that's confusing is that we are the Wetlands Committee, and when people meet the letter of the law in terms of wetlands, how does this assessment affect that? Are they going to be coming back and saying that this proposal, in fact, will have an impact on our wetlands?
Yeah.
They may come back and say that, but if you recall from the review that was done on Peters Lane, they really got into the weeds with the drainage calculations and the deficiencies of the drainage. And if the applicant can't prove to us that there will be if they can't correctly calculate the drainage, they can't prove to us that there will be an impact or not an impact on the wetlands. So that's really what we're going to be looking at, is mostly the drainage calcs.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
So, that's take care of. New business. Construction of a 33,000 square foot commercial building, associated infrastructure, 885 Woodend Road, Assessors Map 30.1. Applicant Core 1 Industrial. Is the applicant here?
The applicant's agent is here in the building, but doesn't look like he's made it back in yet. I can quickly read through my summary if you'd like, or we can't go out of order because it's a special meeting.
It was a special meeting, we can't go out of order.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can quickly read through your summary and then,
And see if he makes it up here, okay.
if he's not here.
Okay. So again, this application just came before the commission. We have not seen this yet at all, so the goal for the commission would be to either accept formally this application or deny accepting it because it's not complete. That's all we're doing tonight. The applicant is proposing to construct a 33,000 square foot commercial building with associated paved parking areas, stormwater infrastructure, and other similar infrastructure such as sidewalks. The site is currently undeveloped vacant land with vegetation dominated by non-native invasive species. The proposed development will result in an impervious cover totaling 55.7% of the property, whereas now there is currently no impervious cover on site. The site has been described as disturbed with building debris present throughout the property. 3 isolated wetland resource areas were delineated on the property, one of which, totaling 1,115 square feet, the applicant is proposing to fill for the construction of the building. The wetlands have been generally described as low-functioning disturbed wetlands dominated by non-native invasive vegetation. The applicant is proposing to create 4,950 square feet of emergent wetland to offset the wetlands proposed for filling. And then I will read through some of my comments and questions that I've provided to the applicant's agent, but I have not heard a response yet on any of these items. You know, okay. I was just gonna read them just for the record, but it was Brian Carey. I don't. He's downstairs. If you wouldn't mind, I texted him too, but yes. Okay. So while we're waiting, I'll just read through the following questions and comments that I supplied to the applicant's agent. It is noted in the Inland Wetland and Watercourse Delineation Report that the property consists of filled land containing soil mixed with associated building debris. Does this debris extend into the identified wetland areas? Has any chemical analysis been conducted of this fill material? And if so, could you provide any said data and potential plans for remedial activities? London plane trees and honey locusts are proposed tree plantings along the northern and eastern perimeter of the development. It is recommended that the applicant revise this species list to include native species versus those not native to this area. Could you please provide a cut fill analysis? Will fill be imported into the site to bring the site to grade? The southerly portion of the property is located in a Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection designated Natural Diversity Database polygon, indicating the presence of listed species. Certain listed species require wetland habitat as part of their life history. As such, please provide the NDDB data request form and reply from Connecticut Deep. It is noted that invasive species dominate the property. Please provide an invasive species control plan for the property to include wetland areas. Ah, here he is. And I'll just finish. I'm just reading through the comments that I provided you.
I'm sorry, I've been on Brian Carey from Land Tech. I was just on another meeting in Guilford.
Okay.
So I got double duty tonight. That's what happens with, but thank you. For the record, I'm Brian Carey, Director of Environmental Services for Land Tech. I'm here on behalf of the applicant for the proposed commercial building at 885 Woodend Road, Core 1 Industrial. I know we've been trading comments with Kelly. She said tonight you were just going to receive the application onto the record and schedule this for a future meeting or public hearing. But I will be back to answer any questions at the next meeting.
What do you think? Is it complete? Okay. Kelly thinks the application is complete. So we need a motion to accept it.
I make a motion to accept it.
Second? Blake, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
All right, Brian, thank you. Okay. Discussion of potential settlement of pending litigation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I've been coming before this body for now 6 or 7 years on the property at 350 Whippoorwill, which the commission will recall is the property adjacent to our property
Right.
at 140, and my neighbors, the Malikas, who are parties to the same litigation at 160 Whippoorwill. We've been in discussions, Attorney Sullivan and I, toward a resolution of the appeal that we filed, which was based on the January 19th hearing, at which time you'll recall the question it was the former owner, at present the current owner, Shana Wolf, they're on the property. They had been under the order, they had a permit, which was revoked at that time. There'd been, you may recall, there'd been a restoration obligation, though, that they were in default of for 6 or 7 years. So the solution, which had been discussed a little bit obliquely that night, potentially, which is coming to fruition, is that we're going to buy the property from Ms. Wolf, with the thought being, as a way of resolving this long-standing problem, that we would undertake a restoration. We hired Steve Danzer to come out a few months ago, and he looked at the property. He rendered a report, which I've shared with Ms. Kerrigan and with council, about a proposed new restoration plan, which would include a conservation easement in favor of the town as well. Therefore, the property would not be developed. It's contiguous to my land, which is obviously beneficial. There'd be no development because you may recall that the ZBA had already ruled that the 7 variances that the former owner had been requesting were not granted. That went up on appeal to the State Superior Court. State Superior Court ruled in favor of the town on that, which obviously we supported. We had opposed, obviously, that building before zoning also. That ruling before Judge Radcliffe was not appealed, so that's a final order. The property won't be developed. And this solution that we're proposing in conjunction with Attorney Sullivan would, I think, solve the problem at long last. We'd have conservation easement, exact boundaries of it to be determined, but there's been a sort of a sketch proposed by Steve Danzer, and we could work out the exact parameters of that. A modest restoration plan, which included, though, 5 years of monitoring, which we're prepared to undertake as the new owner. And I think finally we'd put this long-standing matter to bed. So we would thank the commission for all your efforts and patience in trying to get this to a resolution.
Yes.
Unless anybody has any questions for me, I'll defer to Attorney Sullivan.
The 4 matters that you have on your agenda now are all potential settlements of litigation. So this meeting is really just intended to introduce you to what
Right.
potentially is happening. So Attorney Schofield and I have had a number of conversations. This particular settlement of litigation would result in no development on the property, restoration of the wetlands, and then conservation. So those are the broad strokes of it. So we'll put this on your next meeting agenda. We'll give you the specifics. We'll give you paper copies, and so that's how we'll proceed if that works for the commission. It's sort of a heads up
Okay.
of what's coming. And I know some of you know the history and some of you don't, but we'll share.
Thank you. Thank you. 500 North Avenue, LLC versus the town. Right. Is this Bellis now, right?
Yeah, this is the rest of
Okay, here he comes. The next 2 are Bellis, right?
3.
2. 2. 1, 2.
And then the next page is 3. Attorney Smith.
Oh. That's way up on the top. Here he comes. Who's that? Got Kelly with him? This is yours.
I know it's mine.
Yeah.
Best for last?
Yes. So you're up.
So let me give you a little introduction here as well. There's 3 matters on. The next 3 matters, there's the property on James Farms Road, 795 James Farms Road, which is called 500 North. There is, and we'll just take these together. There's the Peters Lane property, which is known as JRB. And then there's the 170 Orinoco, which is Bluebird Prestige. So all 3 of those on. And one of the reasons these are on is that there's proposals to settle all 3 of these pieces of litigation. And this is also in connection with the town's settlement agreement, and that's one of the reasons Senator Kelly is here, because he is representing the town of Stratford as opposed to the land use. I'm here representing you, and Steve is here representing the plaintiffs, and Senator Kelly is here representing the town of Stratford. The town of Stratford signed an agreement with Attorney Bellis's clients, which are collectively known as the Curcio parties, and that agreement has conditions in it, including that these pieces of litigation get settled, get resolved, but that does not, you still are obliged to exercise your jurisdiction under the wetland statutes, under your regulations and under the state statutes. So again, just as with when Attorney Schofield was here on the Malika matter, this is for you to just get the broad strokes, introduction, and then we'll get you all the paperwork you need, we'll get you all the paper copies you need, so that you can appropriately review it under your regulations. Okay?
Okay. I know it was a long night for all of you, so I'll try to be brief. Attorney Sullivan is correct. Attorney Kelly and I have been working approximately 1 year, maybe a little longer, on resolving about 12 litigation matters that were pending in the town of Stratford. And we came to an agreement, and as Attorney Sullivan said, the mayor signed it on April 28th, and my client signed it. So I'm not putting the whole agreement in, but it involves like 12 cases. So this has been negotiated for a long time, and everyone's on board with it, the town of Stratford and my clients. As Attorney Sullivan has explained, we can't just go and settle. We have a settlement, but we can't just settle it and say we're all good. We have to go before each of the commissions that had anything to do with any of these cases. So we have to go to Wetlands commissions. That's why I'm here to seeing you. We have to go to zoning. We're going there next Wednesday, and then we're going to the planning commission, right? All the commissions in town. Then, after we meet, hopefully we get all those approvals. Then we go to court, and we have to meet all the judges that were involved in these cases, and they have to approve it. Then it's done. So you're not the only ones that I'm subjecting you to. The other commissions have to do the same. So it is a settlement agreement, and what I've given you is a settlement. And there's 3 properties that this board has to consider, and I'll be pretty brief and tell you which ones are easy and which ones are a little more difficult. So we're only here on 3 pieces. The first is called 795 James Farm Road. 795 James Farm Road is a 15-acre piece of parcel that had an approval by a judge for a 116-unit apartment building. We are scrapping that, getting rid of that, and replacing it with a 3-lot single-family subdivision on James Farm Road, okay? And the balance of the land is going to be given to the town of Stratford for open space. That's the settlement. So that 116-unit apartment is gone. What we have now is just a regular 3-lot, single-family homes, and the rest of the land, the 15 acres, going to the town. So why am I talking to you about it? No. Yeah, please. Okay. Let me do it. So 795 James Farm Road has no wetlands on it. I have Mr. Klein here. And I have a report from him. So technically, you really don't have any jurisdiction, but there's no upland review, there's no permits, there's no nothing. However, our statutes always say whenever you have a subdivision, you should always refer it to the Wetlands Commission so they know what's going on, okay? So I think that one's an easy one, right? So 795, and I'll give you the bigger drawings in a minute. The second piece is called 170 Oronoke Lane. 170 Oronoke Lane is a parcel that is was approved by this commission and by the zoning commission in 2012. I don't know if any of you were on the board. I certainly didn't have anything to do with it, but it got approved. So what we're doing in the settlement of this case is going back and again showing you the proposal, showing you what was approved, what you approved in 2012, and asking you to reapprove it. It consists of a cul-de-sac and then 11 single-family houses around the cul-de-sac. You're all pretty familiar with that. The only wrinkle in this, since 2012, they've identified a little teeny bit of wetlands on an adjacent property. There's no wetlands on this property, but there's a golf course. I think it's called the Oronoke Golf Course, but I'm not 100% sure. There's a firehouse and a golf course. They did find a little wetlands, and Mr. Kenny will show it to you, and in his opinion, that this project won't have any effect on that, adverse impact on that. So I don't think that one's going to be very difficult because you already approved it. We're not changing a thing to what you approved. We're just, it's been a long time, so we want to come back and show you what's different, okay? So I don't think that's going to be any big deal. The next one, and my last one for you guys and gals, is called Peters Lane. Peters Lane is a 10-acre parcel that has what we're proposing. No, let me go back. Is a 10-acre parcel, and we had come before your commission for a 4-lot subdivision on it, and that was denied by this commission. It's under appeal and blah, 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 blah. Well, we don't have to revisit that. So what we're doing now is we're coming back to your commission and saying, okay, we listened to what you had to say and what was objectionable, and now we're coming in with a 3-lot subdivision on Peters Lane. So the 3 lots take up, they're conforming lots. They'll go to zoning, or I guess it's your planning commission, and they'll be approved because they meet all the zoning regs. So they're about don't hold me to it, but ballpark like an acre each, right? So there's like 3 acres. The balance of the land on Peters Lane is going to the town of Stratford for open space. That was never before you guys. So what's happening on Peters Lane is the same thing as James Farm Road. On James Farms, there's 15 acres, 3 little houses, the rest goes to the town of Stratford. Peters Lane, there's 10 acres, 3 little lots, and the rest of the land goes to the town of Stratford. And the town of Stratford likes that because this is all near the Roosevelt Forest. So, there's give and take with everyone. We're giving up units, we're giving up an apartment, town of Stratford's getting land. So, that's what a settlement's all about. On Peters Lane, there are wetlands, okay? And we'll go over that, but there are wetlands on the property that my client owns. So that one you've already seen it, I understand that, but I'd like to go, I think that's going to take a little bit more time, Mr. Chairman, because there is wetlands on that property, and I'd like to, carefully make sure you all understand what you're approving, right? So I have, we had the wetlands flagged. We have a report from Mr. Kenny that he investigated the wetlands. We hired a biologist I think his name is Eric Davidson, to consider all those wetlands and any animals, turtles, whatever else there may be. He's a wildlife biologist. And we have the plans that are, those gentlemen, you know, I can have speak to you as to the wetlands and whether there's any adverse impact. The good news is there's no adverse impact, but that's for you guys to decide. But according to these gentlemen, the way we've placed those 3 homes and the way we're mitigating or protecting the wetlands, I think, I hope will satisfy you, is what I should say. But that's what we would like to present to this commission. I know it's the end of a night. I know you had a hard hearing, so you tell me what you'd like me to do. I have Mr. Kelly here to tell you that he hopes that on behalf of the town that you will approve these settlement agreements for these 3 properties, and that's why Kevin came here tonight. You're not hiding on me, are you, Kevin? Did I speak correctly? You have Attorney Sullivan, who I've been working with, representing your commission, so she's familiar with the 3 applications. And then I have Mr. Kenny, who you may all know as a soil scientist. So whatever your pleasure is, I can go through it. It's up to you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my objective is that all the i's are dotted and all the t's are crossed. Kelly and I have had extensive discussions about what may be necessary in order for you to have the proper information that you need in order to review it. And I know that she's proactively made a list of what she thinks is necessary. So, as I said, my objective is we need your approval under the jurisdiction that you have, and then we have to go to the court and get their approval.
Right.
So I think you follow your normal process. You get the documents up front, you have an opportunity to review them, and then you make a considered decision.
Yeah, so I have submitted packages. I'm not going to hand them to you now. And I think I made it pretty easy. I wrote Peters Lane on the bottom, and these are the documents that go with Peters Lane. I did the same thing for Oronoke, right? And then I did the same thing for James Farm Road. Again, they're small, right? They're 8x11s. I also have on the one that I call Peters Lane, I can give them to you now.
Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, this should be a more formal presentation. The document should be formal. There should be hard copies for all the members of the commission, and we move it to the next meeting for consideration.
Yeah, and that's fine, Pat. So I do have for everybody, so you can see Peters Lane, because that's the one I think that is, a little more complex, because there's actually wetlands on the property. So I can give them to her right now. I also have big diagrams, and I can go through them. So I want you to be comfortable with that. The others, I don't think I'm going to make all that paperwork, because there's no wetlands on the property. It's up to you, but yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, so at the next meeting, if you will come prepared with documents on each one of these 3, we'll consider them.
Yep.
And accept them, and then move forward like that.
Okay.
Is that okay?
I don't know what that means by accept. Am I bringing my experts so that they can testify? Is it?
If we're going to follow the normal procedure, you would submit all of your documents by the first Wednesday of the month, and then we would just accept them as complete applications. Is
No,
that what?
that's not okay then, because this is not an application, okay? This is a settlement agreement. So I'm not going to be filing a, quote, application, paying application fees, and doing all that. That's not what's happening here. This is a settlement agreement.
Right.
Right, but we still need all of the copies of all these documents to make sure all these commissioners can review them in
That's fine.
in a timely manner. We're not going to take an application fee from you, but
Yeah.
if you can just submit everything as if it were an application, just so we have all of the drainage report, inland wetlands report, full set of site plans, you know the whole deal.
Well, I have that for the Peters Lane. I'm not going to do that for James Farm Road because there's no wetlands on the property.
Yep, and that's fine.
That's fine.
That's fine for
Oh,
James Farm
okay.
Road.
Yeah,
But for 170.
I know what you guys need.
Yeah, 170 Orinoco though, and Peters Lane though, we do need
Yeah, and
everything.
I have that
Yep.
for you. Okay.
Okay.
So I can give that to her now. I've given it to council, and I don't mind coming back as long as we can. I want to just tell my witness that we'll go forward that night, right?
As long as we have all the documents. Well, after this meeting, well, I made a list, so because I reviewed everything that you submitted already.
Oh, good.
And I'll get that to you, and we'll make sure that this commission has everything for next month's meeting,
Perfect.
so that we can have a
That'll
presentation.
work for me.
Right, and I think
I
you
want you
can-
to have everything that
Yes.
you
Right.
need to see. I don't want to just submit paperwork that is not applicable to this particular problem that I have, which is a settlement agreement. There's a difference.
Right.
That's all I'm
But-
saying.
Yeah, we just care about the two with the wetlands on.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, fair
Okay.
enough. Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll
Okay.
see you all then, I guess, next month.
Right. But get that
And-
stuff to Kelly now, though. so
Yeah,
she
I
can-
might as well give her these.
Okay,
because
well, you don't have to give it to her right now.
The others I've given to your counsel, and I think she needs.
No, wait. Let me be clear. I think you need to submit entire packages and not piecemeal information. So why don't you hold those and give Kelly everything that, talk to her about the list that she has and give her everything at the same time so that all the commissioners can have all the same information and they can all review it. So when you do have a settlement, when there's a proposal to settle, you don't have to follow the process of accepting the application. So we can have that discussion at the next meeting. However, people who may be opposed to any one of these applications are still able to challenge both before this commission or before the court when the proposed settlement goes to the court. So we just want to make sure that but the beauty of a settlement is that it's not ultimately appealable. If the court approves it, then we're not going to be back in litigation. And so one of the advantages here is that we're trying to resolve the litigation in an appropriate manner before the Wetlands Commission and Zoning Commission and the Planning Commission, and then also be able to secure that we're not going to be spending money on litigation. So.
All right. Good. Okay. All right. Staff reports.
All right. So I just have 2 items on my staff report. The first is the clear cutting that occurred on James Farm Road on, let me just get this lot number. On map 50.18, block 3, lot 22, between 465 and 435 James Farm Road. I've been in contact with their attorney, and they are planning on coming before the commission for our October meeting to talk about their violation, how we might want to rectify that, and they do have permit applications as well, so that is forthcoming. And then the 165 and 176 Lindquist Drive, I'm still working with Pat. We've been kind of derailed by some of the litigation we have right now, so we'll have to get back into that shortly on how to rectify that. Because we need to look into if we can access that performance bond. So no updates there. And then I have no other enforcement actions or administrative permits since our last meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners Forum? Nothing? Very good.
Dave, is that where you wanted, I didn't put your item on the agenda. I just left it up to the Commissioners Forum.
So, yeah, thanks. I'd like to get on the agenda for a future meeting, discussion of Kelly's, again, getting Kelly additional help to support the efforts. We're at a time where our environment is under significant stress. We have a 260-page plan on resilience that I don't think has been approached. So much of this is going to fall on the shoulders of Kelly. There used to be 3 people in the role of conservation, and now it's all on Kelly. And so I think we as a commission need to understand what are all of her responsibilities and make sure she has the resources she needs to address them. So I'd like to put that on the agenda and be able to look at that.
Okay.
So you want that as a formal item on the actual agenda? Or do you want that just remain in the commissioners' forum?
I'm fine with it being within the commission
Okay.
forum.
Okay.
But I do think it needs to be really addressed. And in speaking with Kelly, she's thousands of emails behind. It's really hard to be to effectively manage all the pieces to the puzzle. So, yeah, so we could do it within this forum. But I don't know if you want to do it tonight.
No.
That's up to you guys.
I think it's kind of late, and
Okay.
and I think
I agree.
we're pretty burnt.
Okay.
And so I'd rather have a conversation where we're not tired and want to getting out the door. The other thing that I really would love us to be able to do, I think it's disrespectful when we have a public hearing to have the public hearing facing us and not all the people out there. And I really think that we're at a point where there's technology where I could have brought a screen, we could have a machine, and all this stuff is electronic nowadays, and be able to, we all look at the same material at the same time. And it's cheap. I mean, it's not like, you don't have to deal with the wiring and having screens come down from heaven. We could do it low budget, but at least do it in a way that's more respectful. And the other suggestion I would have, not that anyone's asking me, but is that I think it may be beneficial to have people voice their opinion first. I think we talked about this almost a year ago, that other commissions do this.
We've done it too.
Where they have folks speak to the issues first, and then have the presentation.
We've done that also.
So those are the three things I think in a forum we should maybe flush out.
All right. Anything else? Motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.